The crystal towers of Jariel reflected the twin suns in fractured rainbows, and Kale squinted at them as if the spectacle were a practical joke from the universe. He had always suspected that alien capitals were designed to intimidate humans into proper behavior, but so far, all it did was make him feel dizzy and slightly sunburned. Behind him, a hovering drone zipped past, chirping an obnoxious alarm that sounded like a cross between a robot cat and someone sneezing underwater. Kale waved at it. The drone beeped back. He had no idea if this was friendly or a polite prelude to death, but he hoped for the former, mostly because he wasn't ready to die yet. He stumbled over a polished walkway that shimmered like liquid glass, arms flailing, and nearly collided with a pair of robed courtiers who glared at him with the sort of judgment reserved for interstellar trespassers who also managed to trip over nothing. "Human," one hissed, voice like grinding crystal. "Do you intend to continue embarrassing your species?" "I am trying," Kale managed, bowing so awkwardly that he almost tipped over entirely. "It's a learning process." From above, a balcony gleamed with light, and a figure watched him with amusement and a spark of curiosity. Urindra leaned lightly against the railing, her long, curved ears flicking with every movement of the hapless human below. Her hair fell in waves that caught the sun's rays like molten gold, and her eyes held the calm, predatory patience of someone who had endured centuries of protocol, etiquette, and whispering courtiers. Yet now she was laughing quietly to herself, careful not to draw attention, a rare indulgence she allowed only when humans were involved, because humans were gloriously unpredictable. Kale, oblivious to her gaze, tried to greet what he assumed was a ceremonial guard, but turned out to be a floating security droid. He bowed again, this time accidentally nudging it with his shoulder. The droid emitted a series of high-pitched beeps that sounded suspiciously like protest. Sorry, just checking if you're operational." Kale waved his hands, hoping this explained everything. The droid blinked. Kale considered offering it a handshake, but his lack of interstellar protocol training made him hesitate. Urindra suppressed a laugh so sharp it made her long ears twitch. The palace corridors were a labyrinth of anti-gravity walkways and transparent floors that hovered over vast gardens of floating flora, some of which sparkled with bioluminescence, others that occasionally sneezed tiny electric sparks. Kale navigated them with a mixture of awe and clumsy determination, stepping on patches of anti-gravity moss that sent him bouncing into the air. Each bounce was an opportunity to greet a passing noble with panicked enthusiasm, which was usually returned with a polite but firm glare that suggested he might be buried alive in a ceremonial chamber later. Finally, he arrived at the heart of the palace, where Urindra stood, her posture perfect and commanding, radiating the kind of presence that usually caused human visitors to apologize for centuries of imagined crimes. Kale froze. She tilted her head, the long curves of her ears catching the sunlight, and a smile flickered across her face, quick, sly, almost conspiratorial. "You must be the human," she said, voice smooth, yet threaded with amusement. "I've heard stories." Kale bowed, narrowly avoiding smacking his forehead on the railing behind him. "Stories are a human specialty," he said, trying to sound charming and failing spectacularly. "Mostly exaggerations, occasionally lies, always confusing." He tried to grin. Urindra raised an eyebrow, and Kale realized he might have just insulted her people or their entire interstellar alliance. He opened his mouth, then closed it, opting for silent panic instead. Urindra's laugh broke the moment, a sound rare and disarming. "Perhaps," she said, eyes twinkling with mischief. "Or perhaps you simply amuse me." She gestured for him to rise. "Come closer if you dare. The palace does not bite usually." Kale swallowed, stepped forward, and promptly tripped on a non-existent step, flailing his arms. He managed to regain balance just as a hovering fruit orb zoomed past, scattering glowing spheres into the air. One bounced against his helmet and shot sparks that were meant to be charmingly ceremonial, but looked suspiciously dangerous. Kale blinked. "I am highly trained in dodging exploding ceremonial fruits." Urandra's laughter rang out again, musical and unrestrained. She leaned forward over the railing, curiosity dancing in her eyes. "You are reckless," she said, voice laced with delight, "and clumsy and entirely unafraid. That is unexpected." Kale straightened up, bowing with renewed determination. "Fear is optional," he said, "but embarrassment is mandatory." She shook her head, smiling. "I like humans," she said softly, almost to herself, the words a secret she hadn't shared with anyone in years. "They do not follow rules because they understand them. They follow them because they are brave enough to bend them." Kale grinned, entirely missing the subtle weight of her words, and gestured at a floating orb above him. "Does this palace normally throw electric fruit at visitors?" "Only when they are entertaining," Urandra said, ears flicking. "And you are most entertaining." For the first time since Kale arrived on Jariel, the walls of protocol, tradition, and untouchable reverence seemed to soften just enough for possibility. Somewhere in the chaos of sparkling flora, floating drones, and Kale's improbable survival, the beginnings of a connection, fragile and daring, had taken root. And neither of them, not even a princess with long ears or a human with entirely too much confidence, could have predicted what came next. The floating gardens of the palace seemed calm, but only if one ignored the occasional errant spark from the luminescent plants or the way gravity sometimes forgot its manners, leaving visitors midair for awkward seconds. Kale moved cautiously, though cautiously was relative for him, which meant bouncing from one anti-gravity patch to another with a mixture of hope and sheer panic. Urandra followed behind, her long ears twitching in rhythm with each of his clumsy movements. She had promised herself she would remain dignified, but the sight of him dangling upside down from a vine that was clearly not meant to hold human weight made a laugh escape her lips despite herself. "I am not stuck," Kale protested, kicking at the vine. "I am performing a highly advanced human maneuver to test gravitational anomalies." Urandra raised an eyebrow. "You call this maneuver?" she asked, though a smile curved her lips. "Yes. It's extremely technical, very rare, used mostly in emergencies or when you want to impress alien royalty," Kale said, flailing one arm toward her. The vine snapped under his weight, sending him rolling into a cluster of floating orchids that sparkled in protest. One of them discharged a tiny static jolt that left his hair standing straight up. "Ah," he said, straightening, "they're responsive, very responsive." Urandra shook her head, laughing softly. "You are impossible," she said, ears flicking with amusement, "but entertaining." Kale grinned, brushing off the orchid sparks. "Thank you, I try. Humans are highly adaptable." He paused. "Also charming, I hear." He glanced at her hopefully. Urandra's laugh trailed off, replaced by a thoughtful silence as she regarded him from behind long, elegant eyelashes. "I suppose," she said finally, "you are not like other humans. Most are too cautious, too polite, or too terrified to approach anything royal." Her tone was measured, but there was a glint in her eyes, a hint of curiosity. "You lack that instinct." Kale shrugged, as though the universe's unwritten rules about fear were optional reading material. "Rules are suggestions," he said. "Recommendations. Strongly worded suggestions, maybe." They walked along a floating path where the plants occasionally hummed, sensing movement or mood. It was difficult to tell which. Kale reached out impulsively to touch one, and it emitted a sharp, electric chirp. "Friendly mostly," he muttered, hopping back when it buzzed at him. "Totally harmless-ish." Urandra watched, bemused, then gestured toward a wide bridge connecting two sections of the gardens. "I have to admit," she said, "you are braver than I expected, or foolish, perhaps both." Kale grinned. "I'll take both. Bravery has better marketing." Halfway across, Kale tripped on what appeared to be nothing at all. He sprawled forward, arms flailing, and knocked against a hovering orb that contained delicate, glowing petals. The orb wobbled violently, then propelled him backward directly toward Urandra. "Oh no," he gasped, "this is a—" And then, by the oddest combination of panic and miscalculated momentum, his lips met hers. The kiss was unplanned, chaotic, and absurdly human in its awkwardness. Erendra froze, ears twitching in shock, but she did not pull away. Instead, she blinked, and the moment stretched into a bizarre, suspended reality in which gravity, decorum, and sense seemed to pause. Kale scrambled back slightly, cheeks bright red, hands raised in helpless apology. I'm so sorry, gravity did it, not me, totally science." Erendra tilted her head, long ears flicking delicately, then exhaled, letting a laugh escape that was as melodic as it was disarming. "You are reckless," she said, voice threaded with amusement, and entirely unprepared for court etiquette. "But you are fascinating." Kale swallowed. "Fascinating can mean scary too, I hear." Urendra's laugh softened into something warmer, quieter. "Perhaps. Or perhaps it means you are different enough to merit attention." She gestured to the floating gardens around them, where bioluminescent plants flickered in patterns like starlight caught in water. "You see, humans rarely disrupt the order so thoroughly." Kale nodded, heart hammering. "I'm good at disruption," he admitted, "and sometimes chaos, occasionally accidentally charming chaos." He tried to bow again, almost toppling into a spiky plant that had the courtesy to recoil with a harmless zap. Urendra's smile widened. "You have a certain persistence," she said, "that my people find unsettling, and a lack of fear that is intriguing." Her long ears flicked as though they could sense his heartbeat. "Perhaps it is courage, or perhaps it is foolishness, but either way, it is rare." Kale, desperate to regain some dignity, straightened his jacket and declared, "Courage, obviously. Definitely courage. Pure, untainted, heroic courage." Urendra's laughter filled the floating gardens, echoing off the crystalline structures above. The moment of chaos, sparks, and improbable human antics had transformed into something entirely unexpected. The palace, with its centuries of rules, protocols, and unspoken hierarchies, seemed to soften around them. In that instant, Kale's clumsy bravery and irrepressible humor carved a path for something neither tradition nor fear could block. "Come," she said, stepping aside, her long ears swaying like gentle banners. "I will show you more, if you promise not to destroy the gardens entirely." Kale saluted clumsily. "I promise, mostly. Well, I'll try, science and gravity permitting." And so, amid floating flowers, humming plants, and the faint sparks of rebellion against protocol, a fragile, improbable connection formed between human and princess, a bond that neither rules nor fear could entirely contain. Urendra's long ears flicked once more, the faintest hint of amusement in their graceful curve, and Kale, still slightly singed and utterly exhilarated, realized that he might just have stumbled into the most extraordinary adventure of his life. The stars outside the palace shimmered like scattered jewels as Kale adjusted the controls of his small, patched-up starship, the one that had carried him from reckless curiosity to interstellar notoriety. Urendra stood beside him, long ears twitching with a subtle impatience that masked the amusement dancing in her eyes. They had spent weeks traveling beyond the rigid boundaries of her world, through orbiting asteroid bazaars, neon-lit markets of other systems, and even the drifting moons of forgotten planets where gravity was optional and danger inevitable. Every misstep, every accidental crash landing, had become a lesson in courage, improvisation, and, surprisingly, laughter. Kale glanced at the navigation console, which was sparking in a way that could be interpreted as mildly threatening or oddly affectionate. "I think we're still on course," he said, waving a hand at the blinking lights. "Or we're somewhere remarkably close to doom. Either way, it's scenic." Urendra raised an eyebrow, amusement curling her lips. "You navigate chaos with astonishing confidence," she said. "I suppose some humans thrive on calamity." "Thriving is one word for it," Kale admitted, patting a panel that emitted a small puff of smoke. "Doom-adjacent survival is another. I prefer the first." Their travels had not only brought them to the far edges of known space, but also closer to each other. The awkward, chaotic moments that had defined their first encounter had evolved into something richer. Quiet conversations among floating rocks, debates over alien culinary experiments, and laughter that could cut through even the thickest tension of interstellar politics. Urindra had begun to see the world outside her palace not just as a place of strict rules and fear, but as a galaxy filled with possibilities she had never dared to imagine. A sudden alarm blared from the ship, jolting them both upright. "Oh, that's new," Kale muttered, pressing buttons at random. Sparks shot from the console. "Or very old, possibly both. Definitely alarming, though." Urindra leaned over, her ears brushing against his shoulder. "Do not panic," she said. "You are rarely predictable enough to fail entirely." Kale blinked at her, then at the console. "That's supposed to be reassuring, isn't it?" They laughed together, a sound that had become familiar, a tether against the absurdity of space and protocol alike. And then, through the chaos of blinking lights and odd alarms, the distant orbiting lights of Jariel shimmered into view. Their journey had brought them full circle, not back to the rigid walls of the palace, but to the place where laughter and courage had first broken through the ice of expectation. The palace gates opened, not with the usual fanfare of rigid ceremony, but with a quiet acknowledgement of the unusual bond that had formed between the human and the princess. Courtiers peeked from balconies, eyes wide with disbelief, as Kale stepped out first, slightly singed from a misfiring ship console, hair standing in improbable spikes, and ears of Urindra flicking in amusement behind him. "Human," a senior noble murmured, voice tinged with awe and exasperation. "You survived." And she allowed it. Kale bowed, grinning, ignoring the faint crackle of residual sparks. "I'm highly resilient," he said, "and occasionally spectacularly lucky." Urindra moved beside him, standing taller than ever, long ears swaying gently as she addressed the gathered court. "I have seen enough of the galaxy to know that bravery does not always come from titles or bloodlines. Sometimes it comes from persistence, humor, and a willingness to leap without fear of landing." Her words carried weight, and murmurs rippled through the audience. "And sometimes," she added, a faint smile tugging at her lips, "it comes from humans who are utterly unpredictable and utterly endearing." Kale's grin widened, and for the first time, he allowed himself to fully absorb the enormity of their journey. He had arrived as a curious, reckless human, wholly unprepared for alien court customs or the subtle dangers of royal attention. Now he stood as someone who had faced improbable calamities, learned patience and adaptability, and discovered that courage and humor could bridge worlds. Together, they walked through the palace halls, their presence a testament to what could happen when tradition met audacity. Children in the corridors waved, curious and unafraid, and even the floating plants seemed to shimmer in approval. The court's whispers of scandal had softened into a cautious fascination, and Kale's blunders had been reinterpreted as daring acts of heroism, or at least highly entertaining spectacles. Urindra reached for his hand, fingers brushing in a quiet, deliberate gesture that conveyed trust, respect, and something deeper, something that neither ceremony nor alien custom could dictate. Kale squeezed her hand in return, a silent acknowledgement of all they had faced, all they had laughed through, and all that remained possible. Above them, the twin suns dipped below the horizon, scattering light across the crystal towers of Jariel, turning the palace into a kaleidoscope of color and reflection. It was a galaxy of endless rules and infinite chaos, but for Kale and Urindra, it had become a place where courage, humor, and connection mattered more than fear or tradition. As they stepped into the palace gardens once more, sparks from misfiring plants and hovering orbs lighting their path, Kale realized that he had grown, not just braver, but wiser, more attuned to the fragile balance between chaos and order. Urindra, in turn, had learned to trust unpredictability, to embrace joy in unexpected forms, and to recognize that even a human with clumsy confidence could change the course of her life and her people's